Hey guys, tonight we're going to uncover something that might surprise you. You've heard the legends. 300 warriors holding a mountain pass. Soldiers so feared that enemies trembled at the sight of crimson cloaks. A city where weakness meant death and strength meant everything. But here's what nobody tells you in the movies. Sparta didn't fall to some great enemy. It didn't burn in a single catastrophic battle. It just faded, like a candle nobody remembered to replace. Tonight, you're going to discover the actual reason why the Spartan Empire went extinct. And spoiler alert, it wasn't Persians or Athenians or even those shield-breaking Thebans. It was something far more inevitable, something they did to themselves. You're about to witness how the most militarized society in human history engineered its own disappearance. Not through defeat, but through a slow mathematical certainty they couldn't escape. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love knowing you're in Tokyo at sunrise or London in the deep night. We're all gathering around the same campfire, just separated by oceans and time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in your imagination at the edge of ancient Laconia. It's around 400 BC. The sun beats down on rocky valleys where olive trees twist in the Mediterranean heat. You can almost smell the dust and bronze. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the rhythmic chanting of young boys learning to fight. Learning to die, really. Because that's what Sparta was, a society that turned childhood into boot camp and war into religion. But here's the thing historians debate endlessly. Was Sparta ever actually an empire? They controlled territory, sure. They dominated other city-states through fear and the Peloponnesian League. But they never built the kind of sprawling bureaucratic empire that Persia or Rome did. They were more like the North Korea of ancient Greece. Terrifying, isolated, and obsessed with military purity. Okay, that comparison probably won't help you sleep. Scratch that. Think of them as the ultimate specialists. They did one thing better than anyone else in the known world. They created warriors. Perfect, disciplined, nearly unstoppable warriors. And that specialization, that narrowing of focus to a single razor edge, is exactly what doomed them. Because empires need more than warriors. They need farmers and merchants and babies. Lots and lots of babies. And Sparta? Well, you're about to see just how badly they failed at the baby part. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, you need to understand what Sparta actually was. Not the legend, the reality. And trust me, the reality is somehow more fascinating than the myth. Even if it's less comfortable to think about. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the story start to seep in. You're safe here, just drifting back through time, ready to watch an entire civilization slowly realize it made a terrible, irreversible mistake. You need to go back further, back to when Sparta wasn't legendary yet, just violent. It's around 950 BCE, maybe earlier. The historical record gets fuzzy here, which drives archaeologists absolutely mad. You're watching Dorian Greeks sweep down into the fertile Eurotas Valley. They're not philosophers. They're not artists. They're conquerors with iron weapons and a very simple plan. Take the land. Enslave the people already living there. Never apologize. The original inhabitants, the Achaeans, become helots. That word will haunt this entire story. Helots weren't slaves in the way you might imagine. They couldn't be bought or sold individually. They belonged to the Spartan state itself, assigned to plots of land, forced to farm, required to give half their harvest to Spartan masters. And here's the eccentric detail nobody puts in the movies. Once a year, Sparta formally declared war on the Helots. Not metaphorically, actually declared war. This meant young Spartan warriors could hunt and kill Helots as part of their training. The Cryptia, without legal consequence. It was terrorism as state policy. Population control through annual murder. You can feel the weight of that, can't you? A society built on making sure the people who grew your food were too terrified to rebel. But let's step back from that darkness for a moment. You're now standing in early Sparta, Around 700 BCE, the city is taking shape. There are 5 villages clustered together, never unified by walls. Spartans insisted they didn't need walls. Their warriors were their walls. Remember that confidence. It becomes ironic later. Historians still argue whether Lycurgus, the legendary lawgiver, actually existed. Maybe he was real. Maybe he was a mythical figure Spartans invented to justify their weird system. Either way, someone designed the agoge, the training program that turned 7-year-old boys into living weapons. You're watching a child torn from his mother's arms. He's barefoot now, one cloak for all seasons, barely fed, encouraged to steal food to survive, beaten savagely if caught. Not for stealing, for being caught. It's about cunning, see? About learning to endure. The boys sleep on beds they make themselves from river reeds. No blankets in winter. At 12, they're given an older male mentor. The relationship is complicated, often sexual, definitely hierarchical, supposedly educational. Modern scholars debate exactly what that meant in practice. But you can see the logic, twisted as it is. Strip away every comfort. Introduce constant pain. Make violence normal. Make compassion weakness. By the time these boys become men, if they survive, they're perfect soldiers, obedient, fearless, capable of incredible endurance. They can march for days, fight in formation for hours, watch their friends die without breaking ranks. It's effective, terrifyingly effective. But here's what nobody tells you. This system only works if you have enough boys to feed into it, and enough helots to feed the boys, and enough land to support the helots. It's a pyramid that requires constant expansion, or at least constant stability. And history doesn't do stability. You're seeing Sparta win its first major conflicts. The Messenian Wars, brutal, decades-long struggles that doubled Spartan territory. More land means more helots. More helots means more food. More food means more Spartiates, the full citizens, the warrior elite. At Sparta's peak, maybe 8,000 Spartiates exist. That's it. 8,000 full citizens in a population of perhaps 250,000 people. The rest are helots or perioeci, free non-citizens who handle trade and crafts. You're looking at a society where 3% of the population controls everything, where the entire social structure depends on keeping the 97% divided and afraid. It's a pressure cooker, and someone left it on the stove. Let yourself drift for a moment. Feel the Mediterranean sun. Hear the clash of bronze on bronze. You're safe in your bed, just watching shadows of the past, just letting the story unfold. You're standing inside the machine now, and it's humming with perfect, terrible efficiency. By 500 BCE, Sparta has refined itself into something unique in human history. Not just a military state, a society where literally everything serves war. You want to understand why they went extinct? Start here, with the thing that made them great. Because it's the same thing that killed them. Spartan boys enter the agoge at 7. They emerge at 30, if they survive, as full citizens. 23 years of training. Think about that. 23 years before you're considered a complete person. Before you can vote in the assembly. Before you can live with your wife full-time. Yes, Spartiates married, usually in their 20s. But they couldn't actually live with their wives until 30. They still slept in communal barracks with other soldiers. Still ate at their syssitia, their mandatory mess halls. Every night, 15 or so men gathering to eat terrible food together. Black broth, they called it. Pork boiled in blood and vinegar. A visiting Greek once tasted it and said he finally understood why Spartans were so willing to die. Death had to taste better than dinner. That's probably apocryphal, but you get the idea. The point wasn't nutrition. The point was solidarity. Shared suffering. Nobody gets special treatment. Nobody gets comfortable. Here's where historians argue endlessly. Some say this created unbreakable bonds. Others say it created psychologically damaged men incapable of normal human connection. Probably both are true. You're watching a Spartiate warrior in his prime now. Maybe he's 35. He owns land worked by helots. He contributes his required amount of food to his syssitia from that land. If he can't make the contribution, he loses citizenship. drops out of the elite class entirely, becomes a lesser, a hypomean. The shame is unbearable. So he's trapped, see? He can't work the land himself. That's beneath a warrior. He can't engage in trade. Also beneath him. He depends entirely on his helots producing enough. And on the state keeping those helots terrified. It's elegant in a horrifying way. You're also noticing something strange about Spartan warfare. They're incredible in pitched battles. The phalanx, that wall of shields and spears, is nearly unstoppable when Spartans form it. They train for it constantly. Every man knows exactly where to stand, how to move as one organism, when to push, when to hold, when to kill. At the Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE, Spartans basically saved Greece from Persian conquest. Their discipline is legendary. But here's the eccentric detail. Spartans are terrible at sieges, absolutely awful at adapting to new tactics. Their entire system produces men who excel at one specific type of combat. Change the rules, and they struggle. They're the ultimate specialists in a world that's about to demand generalists. Now you're seeing the birth rate problem start. Not obviously yet, but it's there. Spartiates can only marry Spartiate women. The bloodline must stay pure. Spartan women are unusual for ancient Greece. They own property, exercise, speak their minds. But there aren't that many of them. And here's the mathematical trap. If a Spartiate dies in battle without sons, his land might go to daughters. But daughters marry other Spartiates. So land starts concentrating. Fewer families controlling more wealth. Fewer men able to maintain the food contributions required for citizenship. The eligible warrior class starts shrinking, slowly at first. But inevitably, you're watching the machine reveal its fatal flaw. It can't grow. It can barely sustain itself. Every loss is permanent, because making a new Spartiate takes 30 years minimum and requires a system so rigid it can't adjust to reality. Athens, by comparison, could grant citizenship to outsiders, could adapt, evolve, incorporate new people. Sparta couldn't, wouldn't. Their purity was their pride, and their pride was their doom. Close your eyes now. Feel yourself drifting, the bronze and blood fading just a little. You're still safe, still warm, just watching the gears turn in a machine that doesn't know it's already breaking. You're about to meet the people nobody wants to talk about, the ones who made everything possible and impossible. The helots. Remember them from earlier? The enslaved population that outnumbered Spartans 10 to 1. Maybe more. The historical sources are vague because Spartans didn't like advertising their vulnerability. And make no mistake, this was their greatest vulnerability. You're standing in a helot village now, somewhere in Messenia. It's dawn. Families are waking in simple stone dwellings. They're not chained. They're not locked up. They're bound by law and terror. A helot man walks to the fields he doesn't own. He'll work all day in the Mediterranean heat. Half of everything he grows goes to the Spartiate who owns his labor. He keeps barely enough for his family to survive. This has been his life, his father's life, his grandfather's life. And here's the thing that haunts this story. Helots had families, had culture, had their own identity as Messenians, a conquered people who remembered being free. They weren't just anonymous labor. They were a nation in chains. And nations in chains eventually remember how to break them. Now you're watching something deeply uncomfortable. It's autumn. The Crypteia has begun. Young Spartans, around 20 years old, are sent into helot territory. At night, armed with daggers. Their mission is simple. Kill helots who seem strong or rebellious or just unlucky. It's called counterinsurgency now. The Spartans called it education. Teaching young warriors to kill without hesitation. Teaching helots that resistance meant death. Here's the eccentric detail that historians still debate. Some sources say helots were forced to get drunk and perform humiliating dances for young Spartans. Object lessons in what happens when you're not disciplined. Other sources suggest this was Athenian propaganda. Athens and Sparta hated each other. After all, maybe Athens exaggerated helots' suffering to make Sparta look worse. Or maybe it really happened. Maybe both things are true. It happened, and Athens loved talking about it. History is messy that way. You're seeing the mathematical problem now. Sparta needs helots to farm, but helots hate Sparta. So Sparta needs warriors to control helots. But training warriors takes decades. And warriors die. In battle, sure, but also just from living. Disease, accidents, old age. And every warrior who dies without producing warrior sons shrinks the eligible population. Meanwhile, helots keep having children. Lots of children. Because that's what happens in agricultural societies. Big families mean more hands for the harvest. The ratio gets worse every generation. Fewer Spartans. More helots. More terror required to keep control. More warriors dedicated to internal security instead of external conquest. It's a spiral, and you're watching it begin. In 464 BCE, an earthquake hit Sparta. A massive one. The ground literally opens up. Buildings collapse. Thousands die, and the helots see their chance. They revolt. Not just a small uprising, a full-scale rebellion. They fortify Mount Ithome and hold out for years. Sparta has to call on allies to help. Athens sends troops initially, then recalls them in suspicion. It's humiliating. The greatest warriors in Greece needing help to control their own slave population. Eventually, Sparta wins. Sort of. They can't actually defeat the rebels completely. So they negotiate. Let the surviving rebels leave. Go colonize somewhere else. To stop fighting. It's a compromise, which Sparta hates. But what choice do they have? They can't afford to keep fighting. Can't afford to lose more citizens in an endless guerrilla war. You're watching the first real crack in the system. The moment Sparta realizes it's trapped. Can't expand safely because that requires leaving fewer warriors at home. Can't contract because they need helot-worked land to support the warriors they have. Can't reform because that would mean admitting the system is flawed. And Spartans don't admit flaws. They double down. More terror, more control, more rigid enforcement of the rules, which only makes the problem worse. Let your mind rest here for a moment. Feel the weight of it. A society built on a foundation that's slowly crumbling. People trapped on both sides. Helots by force, Spartans by pride. You're warm in your bed, safe from ancient earthquakes and ancient hatreds, just drifting through their world like a ghost, watching what they couldn't see themselves. You're walking toward the most famous last stand in history. 480 BC, the Hot Gates, Thermopylae. You know this story, or think you do. 300 Spartans holding off 1,000,000 Persians. Except it wasn't 300 total fighters. There were several thousand Greeks there. And it wasn't 1,000,000 Persians, probably closer to 100,000. But the legend got the important part right. The Spartans stayed when everyone else left. And they died to the last man. You're standing with King Leonidas now. He's older than the movie version. Maybe 60, gray in his beard, but still powerful, still commanding. He's chosen 300 Spartiates to accompany him. Not randomly. Here's the detail nobody mentions. He specifically chose men who already had sons. Think about that. He knew this was a suicide mission. So he picked men whose genetic line was already secure. Men whose deaths wouldn't end family bloodlines. It's coldly logical and absolutely devastating. You're watching the march north. Crimson cloaks flowing. Bronze gleaming. They know they're not coming back. Spartans always know. They've spent their entire lives preparing to die well. This is their purpose. Their entire identity. The pass at Thermopylae is perfect for them. Narrow, maybe 50 feet wide at the crucial point. Persian numbers mean nothing here. They can only attack a few at a time. And Spartan phalanx in a narrow space is a meat grinder. For 2 days they hold. Persians throw wave after wave. Immortals, they're called the Persian elite guard. They die like everyone else. Herodotus, the historian who recorded this, says Xerxes jumped from his throne 3 times in terror, watching his best troops crumble against bronze and discipline. But you know how this ends. A local Greek named Ephialtes betrays the pass, shows the Persians the mountain path around the Hot Gates. Leonidas realizes they're about to be surrounded. He sends most of the Greeks away, keeps his 300, and several hundred Thespians who refuse to leave. History forgets the Thespians, remembers only the Spartans. That's how propaganda works. The final morning comes. Persians attack from both sides now. The Spartans fight until their spears break. Then with swords. Then with daggers. Then with hands and teeth. The Persians bury them with arrows. Just stand back and shoot until the bodies stop moving. Later, Xerxes has Leonidas' head cut off and stuck on a pole. Unprecedented dishonor for a fallen king. It shows how much the Spartans terrified him. Here's what the legends don't tell you. The demographic cost. 300 Spartiate warriors, in a population that maybe numbered 8,000 total. That's nearly 4% of the entire warrior class. Gone in 3 days. And remember, these were men with sons. The proven fathers. The genetic winners. Men in their prime, or just past it. Still capable of producing more children. More future warriors. All gone. Athens lost ships at Salamis. Ships can be rebuilt in a year. Replacing a Spartiate takes 30 years minimum. You're watching Sparta win its greatest propaganda victory and suffer a wound it will never fully heal. Because here's the thing historians debate endlessly. Was Thermopylae worth it? Strategically, probably yes. It delayed Persians long enough for Greece to organize. The stand became a rallying cry, inspired Athens to keep fighting, led eventually to Greek victory. But for Sparta specifically, for their long-term survival, losing 300 warriors who'd proven they could produce sons? That's a catastrophic loss they couldn't afford. They just didn't know it yet. Still believed their system was invincible. Still thought glory and discipline could overcome mathematics. You're watching them march home in triumph, mourning their dead, celebrating their sacrifice, not seeing the demographic clock ticking, the empty spaces in the Sicilia, the widows who might not remarry, the bloodlines ended, the slow, invisible arithmetic of extinction beginning. Let yourself rest here, in the shadow of the mountains, where glory and doom wore the same face. You're safe, just dreaming of bronze and stone, of men who chose death so perfectly they forgot to choose life. You're watching Sparta realize something is wrong. It's 400 BCE now, 80 years after Thermopylae. Sparta just won the Peloponnesian War, defeated Athens, became the dominant power in Greece. This should be their golden age. Instead, they're quietly panicking, because they're running out of Spartiates. You're in the assembly now. The Apella, where full citizens vote. There used to be 8,000 men here, maybe more. Now, closer to 3,000. Some estimates go as low as 2,000. In less than a century, the warrior class has shrunk by 60% or more. What happened? War, obviously. Thermopylae was just the beginning. The Peloponnesian War lasted 27 years. Athens might have lost, but Sparta bled for every victory. At the Battle of Leuctra, wait, we'll get to that disaster later. Even before that, casualties mounted. 10 men lost here, 20 there, 50 in a bad engagement. Each one irreplaceable. But war isn't even the main problem. You're about to see something fascinating and terrible. The oligarchia crisis. Shortage of men. It's what Spartans called their demographic collapse. And it wasn't just about soldiers dying. Here's the eccentric detail that drives the whole thing. Spartan inheritance laws. Remember how Spartiate women could own property? That was unusual in ancient Greece. Almost progressive if you ignore the slavery and child abuse. But watch what happens. A Spartiate dies without sons. His land goes to his daughters. His daughters marry other Spartiates. Now those Spartiates control 2 estates. Their children inherit concentrated wealth. Meanwhile, a Spartiate who can't maintain his land contribution loses citizenship. Becomes a hypomean. Still technically Spartan, but no longer elite. Can't vote. Can't hold office. His children can't become full Spartiates. The bloodline drops out of the ruling class. You're watching wealth concentrate into fewer and fewer hands. By 400 BCE, maybe 1% of Spartiates control everything. The rest are scrambling to maintain the minimum. Historians still argue about how intentional this was. Some say it was accidental, just unfortunate consequences of inheritance patterns. Others suggest the oligarchs deliberately designed the system this way. Keeping the ruling class small meant more power for those who remained. Either way, the math is devastating. To make a new Spartiate, you need a Spartiate father and Spartiate mother, 30 years of training and survival, enough land to support Sicilia contributions, and you need the child to survive infancy. Oh, right. You haven't seen the infant inspections yet. You're at the edge of the apothecary now, a pit in the mountains. When Spartan babies are born, elders inspect them, looking for deformities, signs of weakness. If the baby fails inspection, and sources vary on how often this happened, it gets left at this pit to die. Exposure, they called it. Archaeological evidence suggests this might have been exaggerated by other Greeks. Infant remains at the site show many died of natural causes, not exposure. But even if it happened occasionally, even if it was rare, the psychological impact mattered. Spartans believed in ruthless selection. Only the strong survive. Which sounds great until you realize you're deliberately shrinking your already shrinking population. Athens didn't do this. Corinth didn't. Thebes didn't. They had higher infant mortality, sure. Everyone did in the ancient world. But they didn't make it policy. Now you're seeing the baby crisis from the women's perspective. Spartan women had more freedom than most Greek women. They exercised. They owned property. They spoke their minds. But they also faced enormous pressure to produce sons. Healthy sons. Sons who could survive the agoge. Sons who could become warriors. The survival rate through the agoge was probably around 70 to 80%, which means 1 in 4 boys entered training and never came out. Disease, accidents, the brutal conditions. Some are killed by older boys. Some just died from exposure and malnutrition. For every 4 sons a woman bore, maybe 3 survived childhood. Maybe 2 completed the agoge. Maybe 1 lived to reproduce. You need to average more than 2 surviving warrior sons per family just to maintain the population. Sparta wasn't hitting that number. Not even close. Let your mind drift through this. The empty barracks. The silent gymnasium. The Sicilia with fewer men each year. You're watching excellence become extinction. Watching quality eat quantity. And nobody can stop it. Because stopping it would mean admitting the system is broken. Would mean changing the rules. Accepting outsiders. Loosening standards. Becoming less Spartan. And Spartans would rather disappear than do that. Close your eyes. Feel the warm night. You're safe here. Just drifting through the mathematics of pride. You're about to meet the women who almost saved Sparta. Almost. But not quite. By 400 BCE, Spartan women control roughly 40% of all land in Laconia. Some estimates go higher. This is unprecedented in the ancient world. Athenian women couldn't own property at all. Persian women, Egyptian women, Roman women, all restricted in various ways. But Spartan women? They're landowners. Wealthy. Educated. Physically strong. You're watching a Spartan woman exercise now. She's maybe 25, running in the gymnasium. Actually running, not delicately walking like Athenian women are supposed to. She's wearing a short tunic that shows her legs. Scandalous by Greek standards. Athenian men called Spartan women thigh flashers as an insult. Spartan women didn't care. They trained their bodies. Not for war. They didn't fight. But for childbirth. Strong mothers produce strong sons, the logic went. Can't have weak women bearing warriors. Here's the eccentric detail nobody expects. Spartan women mocked their own husbands. Openly. There are recorded instances of Spartan women insulting men who showed cowardice, telling sons to come back with their shields or on them, meaning victorious or dead. No middle ground. One story, probably apocryphal but revealing, tells a mother who killed her son herself when he fled battle. The expectation was that brutal. You're watching one of these women now at her estate. Her husband is at the Sicilia. He sleeps there most nights. She manages the property, oversees the helots, makes economic decisions, raises the children until the boys are 7. She has influence, education, authority, and yet she can't save Sparta because the demographic math doesn't work. Even strong, healthy women can only have so many children, maybe 6 or 8 pregnancies, maybe 4 or 5 live births. And remember the attrition rate. Infant mortality, the agoge, wars. You need every woman producing multiple surviving sons. But that's not happening. Here's why historians still argue about this. Some Spartiates married late. Remember, they couldn't live with their wives until 30. That's already past prime reproductive years for the time. Some evidence suggests Spartiate men had relationships with each other. The Agoge created intense same-sex bonds. Whether those were sexual, romantic, or just deeply fraternal is debated. But they might have reduced interest in producing children. Some wealthy Spartiates might have deliberately limited family size. Fewer heirs means less division of property. Keep the wealth concentrated. And some women simply couldn't conceive or died in childbirth. Medicine was primitive, even strong. Athletic women died, bringing children into the world. You're watching the one reform that almost worked. Around 400 BCE, Sparta starts encouraging polyandry. Sort of. A woman might have children with multiple Spartiate men. The children all count as legitimate. It's pragmatic. Get more warrior babies from fewer women. But it's also half-hearted, not officially sanctioned, just quietly tolerated in some cases. Not enough to reverse the population collapse. Now you're seeing the class tension this creates. Rich Spartan women control enormous estates. They're surrounded by comfort despite Spartan austerity. They have influence without official power. They can shame men but can't vote. They can inherit property but can't prevent its concentration. And they're blamed quietly, not officially, for the oligarchia, not producing enough sons, being too independent, too educated, too wealthy. The same freedoms that made them unusual now get questioned. Maybe Athens had it right, some Spartans whisper. Maybe women need to be controlled more strictly, but they don't actually implement that. Can't. The system is too rigid to change, too proud to admit error. Here's what breaks your heart if you think about it. These women were probably the best hope. If Sparta had truly empowered them, let them vote, let them hold office, let them shape policy, they might have pushed for reforms, opening citizenship to outsiders, reducing the Agoge's brutality, accepting that quality and quantity both matter. But that would require Spartan men to share power. To admit women's judgment might exceed their own. And Spartan men, trained from age 7 to value dominance and hierarchy, couldn't do that. So you're watching potential wither. Strength that could have saved them. Intelligence that saw the problems clearly. All constrained by a system that valued them only as mothers. Only as producers of warriors. And when they couldn't produce enough warriors, because math and biology and brutal selection don't care about ideology, they got blamed for the failure. Let yourself rest in this sad irony. The freest women in Greece, still not free enough to save their civilization. You're warm. You're safe. Just drifting through their trapped world. Watching potential fade into the Mediterranean dusk. You're watching the numbers become undeniable. 371 BC. Sparta sends an army to face Thebes. King Cleombrotus commands 700 Spartiates. 700. That's everyone they can muster. Remember when there were 8,000? Now, they're scraping together less than 10% of that. The rest of the army is Perioeci and allies. Good fighters, sure, but not Spartiates. Not the elite. You're seeing the crisis written in the battle formation. The thin red line that used to be thick. The gaps where warriors should stand. Every man here knows. This might be all of them. All of Sparta's full citizens capable of fighting. If they lose, really lose, there's nothing behind them. No reserves. No next generation ready. Just empty barracks and old men. Here's what historians still debate. How did it get this bad? War losses, obviously. The baby crisis we talked about. But there's something else. Something that shows up in the sources if you read carefully. Spartans started avoiding marriage. Some men, anyway. The Syssitia bonds were intense. Living with the same 15 men for decades. Eating together. Sleeping in the same barracks. Fighting side by side. Some scholars suggest these relationships became primary. Wives became secondary. Biological necessity rather than emotional connection. And if a man's emotional needs are met by his mess hall brothers, why bother with children? Other evidence points to wealth hoarding. Rich Spartans keeping their estates intact. Marrying, but limiting children deliberately. Better one son who inherits everything than three sons who divide it. It's rational economically, catastrophic demographically. And then there's the hypomyones, the men who dropped out of citizenship. They're still ethnically Spartan, still trained in the agoge as boys. But they lost their land or couldn't maintain contributions. So they're not Spartiates anymore. By 371 BCE, there might be more hypomyones than Spartiates. Maybe 2 or 3 times more. All that warrior training, all that potential military power, locked out of citizenship by economic barriers. Sparta could have reformed the system, brought them back in, loosened the land requirements. But that would mean the oligarchs giving up power, sharing wealth, admitting the system failed. So they don't. You're watching 700 Spartiates march to Leuctra. They're the last of their kind, the final generation of the legendary warrior elite. And they're about to meet Epaminondas, the Theban general who figured out how to beat them. Here's the eccentric detail. Sparta's tactics hadn't changed in 200 years. The phalanx, 8 rows deep, usually. The best warriors on the right wing. They'd advance, push, break the enemy left, then wheel and roll up the line. It worked for centuries. Everyone knew it worked, so everyone copied it, which meant everyone also knew how to counter it. Except Sparta never adapted, never evolved, because adaptation means admitting you're not already perfect. Epaminondas looked at the Spartan system and saw the weakness. They always stacked the right wing, always put their best there. So he created the sacred band, 300 elite Theban warriors, all male couples, lovers fighting beside each other. He stacked them 50 rows deep on his left wing. 50. Concentrated all his power against Sparta's best. You're watching the battle begin. The Spartans advance perfectly. Shields locked, spears leveled, discipline absolute, and the Theban left wing hits them like a hammer. 50 rows deep, pushing. The Spartan right wing, the Spartiates, can't hold. Too much weight, too much pressure. They're the best warriors in Greece. And it doesn't matter. King Cleombrotus dies in the first minutes. 400 Spartiates die with him. 400. Out of 700. More than half. The rest break and run. Spartans running. Fleeing the field. It's unthinkable. And it's happening. The battle lasts maybe an hour. In that hour, Sparta's military supremacy dies. Their aura of invincibility shatters. And their demographic crisis becomes catastrophic. You're watching the survivors stagger home. Maybe 300 Spartiates left alive. 300 full citizens. In the entire state. The same number that went to Thermopylae. Except this time, nobody's celebrating. This time, it's just loss. Pure, irreversible loss. Let your mind drift through the silence. The empty Syssitia. The barracks that will never fill again. You're safe here. Just watching the mathematics of excellence finally come due. Just seeing the moment when being the best wasn't enough anymore. Because there weren't enough of them left to matter. You're standing in Sparta the day after Leuctra. The messengers have arrived. The news spreads like cold fire. 400 Spartiates dead. More than half the army. The king dead. The invincible defeated. You're watching something unprecedented happen. Sparta decides not to mourn. Not publicly, anyway. The ephors, the 5 elected officials who actually run things, issue a decree. Families of the dead will not wear mourning clothes. Will not wail in the streets. Will conduct business as usual. Families of survivors will not celebrate. Everything must appear normal. Because showing weakness invites attack. And Sparta is weaker than it's ever been. Here's the eccentric detail that reveals everything. After Leuctra, Sparta has to pass a special law, exempting the survivors from punishment for cowardice. Because technically they ran. They fled the battlefield. And Spartan law says that's unforgivable. Capital offense. Loss of citizenship at minimum. But if they enforce that law, they'll have almost no citizens left. So they don't. They quietly ignore their most sacred principle. Survival trumps honor. That's how desperate things are. You're watching the aftershocks now. Thebes invades the Peloponnese. Not just raids. Full invasion. They march straight to Laconia, the Spartan heartland. And Sparta can't stop them. For the first time in anyone's memory, enemy soldiers walk through Spartan territory unopposed. They burn farms, free helots, and Sparta huddles behind. Wait, Sparta doesn't have walls. Remember? They never built walls. Spartans were their walls. Now, they're frantically building fortifications. For the first time in their history. Digging trenches. Piling stones. You're watching the psychological collapse. Not just military defeat. Identity collapse. Everything Sparta believed about itself is proving false. They're not invincible. They're not self-sufficient. They're not superior. They're just diminished. Historians still argue about whether Sparta could have recovered. Some say Leuctra was the fatal wound. Others suggest they might have adapted if they'd reformed immediately. Open citizenship. Arm the hypomyones. Modernize tactics. But they don't. They double down instead. Enforce the old rules harder. Punish deviation more severely. Insist the system works fine. We just need to be more Spartan. It's the death spiral of ideological rigidity. Now you're seeing the worst part. The helots realize Sparta is vulnerable. Not all at once. But whispers spread. The masters can be beaten. The masters are weak. And Thebes is offering freedom. In 370 BCE, Epaminondas invades again. This time, he brings tools and architects. You're going to build something. You're watching it rise. The city of Messenia, a fortified capital for the Messenian helots. Massive walls, towers, gates, the most impressive fortifications in Greece. Built in just a few months by thousands of freed helots. People who've been enslaved for 300 years. Suddenly free, suddenly armed, suddenly protected by walls that make Sparta's new defenses look pathetic. The economic impact is immediate. Sparta loses half its territory, half its agricultural base. The helots who work the land are gone. The food that supported the Syssitia is gone. Spartans who could barely maintain citizenship contributions before, now impossible. More dropout, fewer citizens, less power, less legitimacy. The spiral accelerates. You're watching Spartiates do something unthinkable. They're working their own land now. Some of them, warriors with calloused hands from farm tools instead of weapons. It's humiliating. It's necessary. It's the end of what Sparta was. Because a Spartiate who farms isn't a full-time warrior. Can't maintain the training. Can't keep the edge. The system requires total dedication. Anything less makes you not Spartan. But they have no choice. Here's what breaks them psychologically. Other Greek city-states notice. Athens, which Sparta defeated in the Peloponnesian War, is rebuilding. Thebes is the new dominant power. And Sparta? Sparta is almost irrelevant. They still have their reputation. Mercenaries still hire Spartans at premium rates. But as a state, as a power, they're finished. They just don't know how to stop being Sparta. Don't know how to be anything else. So they keep going through the motions. Electing ephors. Training boys in a gutted agoge. Maintaining Syssitia that are half empty. Pretending everything is fine, while the world moves on without them. Let yourself rest in this twilight. The end that isn't quite ending. The fade that takes decades. You're warm. You're safe. Just watching pride refuse to admit defeat. Just seeing stubbornness mistake itself for strength. The Mediterranean night settling over empty training grounds. You're watching Sparta do something that would have been unthinkable a generation ago. They're building walls. Not makeshift defenses in a panic. Real walls. Permanent fortifications around the city itself. It's 370 BCE, maybe a bit later. The year doesn't matter as much as what it means. Sparta, which once declared that its warriors were its walls, now admits it needs actual walls. Stone and mortar. Physical barriers. A confession carved in limestone. You're standing with an old Spartiate watching the construction. He's maybe 70. He remembers when Sparta was feared across the known world. Remembers Thermopylae being celebrated. Remembers Athens surrendering. And now he's watching laborers, not even citizens, mostly perioeci and hired help, stack stones, building what his generation swore they'd never need. Here's the detail that historians find revealing. The walls aren't particularly impressive. Not compared to Messenia's magnificent fortifications. Not compared to Athens' long walls. These are functional but modest. Almost apologetic. As if Sparta is building them while still insisting they don't really need them. Still maintaining the fiction of invincibility. even as they literally wall themselves in. You're seeing the psychology of decline, the cognitive dissonance. We're still Sparta, still the warriors everyone fears. We're just being practical, just adapting to circumstances, not admitting fundamental failure. But everyone knows. Other Greeks see it clearly. Sparta with walls is Sparta admitting weakness. The message spreads across the Mediterranean. The lion has built a cage around itself. Now you're watching the internal debates. The ephors arguing about policy. Some want radical reform. Open citizenship to hypomyones. Let perioeci become full Spartiates. Maybe even arm and train helots who remained loyal. Desperate times require desperate measures. Others refuse. Absolutely not. That would destroy everything Sparta is. The purity of the Spartiate class is what makes them special. Dilute that, and you're just another Greek city-state. Better to die as Sparta than survive as something else. Here's the eccentric detail that shows how broken the system is. Some Spartiates start taking bribes. Foreign powers offering gold to influence Spartan policy. This was always technically illegal. Spartans weren't supposed to care about money. The austere warrior life. Crimson cloaks and iron discipline. But when your population collapses and your economy crashes, principles become expensive. Some men take Persian gold. Some take Athenian silver. It's not widespread, but it happens enough that people notice. Enough that it becomes a scandal. Sparta, the city that once killed a messenger for bringing foreign gold, now has citizens quietly accepting foreign payments. You're watching one trial now. A Spartiate accused of taking bribes. The evidence is clear. He did it. He admits it. His defense? How else was I supposed to maintain my Sicilia contributions? And the court has no answer. Because he's right. The system doesn't work anymore. Can't work. But they can't admit that. So they exile him. Remove the symptom. Ignore the disease. Historians still argue whether Sparta might have recovered if they'd reformed. If they'd opened citizenship in 370 BCE, brought in maybe 2,000 or 3,000 hypomyones, trained them properly, created a new generation of warriors from people who already knew Spartan culture. The math might have worked, but they don't do it. By the time they try reform, and they will try, eventually it'll be too late. The moment of possible salvation passes. You're watching it slip away, one stubborn decision at a time. Now you're seeing Sparta's new role in Greece. They're not powerless exactly. They still have skilled warriors, still have their reputation, but they're not dominant. They're one voice among many in Greek politics, and often not the loudest voice. Thebes is ascendant. Athens is recovering. Even smaller city-states feel comfortable challenging Sparta. The Peloponnesian League, Sparta's alliance system, starts fracturing. Cities that were forced into alliance when Sparta was strong start drifting away. Not openly defying, just becoming less cooperative, responding to Spartan requests more slowly, sending fewer troops when asked. Death by 1,000 small defections. You're watching a 70-year-old Spartiate in the Sicilia. His mess has 7 men. Used to have 15. 3 died at Leuctra. 2 lost citizenship and couldn't maintain contributions. 3 hypomyones couldn't be replaced. The remaining 7 eat in silence mostly. What is there to say? They're living in the corpse of their civilization, maintaining rituals that have lost their meaning, going through motions because stopping would mean admitting it's over. Let yourself drift through this slow collapse. The walls rising, the pride crumbling, the system grinding toward inevitable conclusion. You're warm. You're safe. Just watching stubbornness and mathematics locked in a battle stubbornness cannot win. The Mediterranean stars coming out over a city that's becoming its own mausoleum. You're watching the final humiliation. 369 BC. Epaminondas invades again. 4th time now. He marches through Laconia almost casually. Sparta can't stop him, can barely muster a defense. But this time, he's not just freeing helots. He's making it permanent. You're standing at the moment when Messenia becomes officially independent. Not just freed slaves hiding behind new walls. A recognized state. A nation. With its own government, its own army, its own identity. Everything Sparta spent 3 centuries suppressing. Gone in a decade. The Messenians number maybe 40,000 people, maybe more. They controlled half of Sparta's agricultural land, produced half the food, and now they're just leaving, walking away, taking their labor, their land, their lives with them. Sparta can't stop it, can't even protest effectively. Because what are they going to do? Invade Messenia? With what army? They have maybe 2,000 Spartiates left, maybe less. Messenia has walls that would take years to breach, and Thebes standing behind them as guarantor. You're watching the economic collapse accelerate. Spartiates who depended on Messenian helots for food suddenly have nothing. Their land is in Messenia, now foreign territory. They can't work it, can't claim it, can't even visit safely. Overnight, they're landless, which means they can't maintain citizenship, which means they drop out of the Spartiate class, which means even fewer citizens. The spiral tightens. Here's the eccentric detail nobody expects. Some ex-helots become richer than Spartiates. Messenian freedmen taking over the best farmland, trading with other Greek states, building businesses. Meanwhile, Spartiates are locked in their rigid system. Can't trade, can't work, can't adapt, just slowly starving in their crimson cloaks, maintaining pride while losing everything else. You're seeing a few Spartans try to adapt. They start hiring themselves out as mercenaries. Not officially. Sparta doesn't have a formal mercenary policy yet. But individual Spartiates, desperate for money, start taking foreign contracts, fighting for Persian satraps, serving Sicilian tyrants. Anywhere that pays. It's shameful. Warriors who used to fight for glory, now fighting for gold. But what choice do they have? Their economy is gone. Their land is gone. Their helots are gone. Pride doesn't fill stomachs. Historians still argue about whether Messenia's independence doomed Sparta. Some say Sparta was already doomed. Messenia just made it obvious. Others say Sparta might have slowly recovered if they'd kept the Messenian land and population. Probably the first group is right. The demographic collapse was already terminal. Messenia just accelerated the timeline. Now you're watching Sparta try to adjust to irrelevance. They still send envoys to pan-Hellenic councils, still vote on Greek affairs, but nobody really cares what Sparta thinks anymore. Their threats are empty. Their military is a shadow. Their economy is broken. Other city-states listen politely and ignore them. It's worse than being hated. It's being pitted. You're in the Agoge now. It's still running. Barely. Maybe 50 boys instead of hundreds. The training is less intense. How can it be otherwise? Fewer instructors, less food, aging facilities. But they go through the motions. Because if the Agoge stops, what is Sparta? Just another Greek town. Poor, weak, forgotten. Better to maintain the fiction. Keep training boys to be warriors. Even though there's nothing for them to do when they graduate. No wars to fight. No helots to control. Just empty barracks and memories. Here's what's psychologically devastating. The Messenians don't just become independent. They thrive. Messenia becomes beautiful. Art and theater flourish. Trade brings wealth. The freed people build temples and monuments. They're happier than they ever were under Sparta. And Spartans can see it. Can see the people they enslaved for centuries doing better without them. Can see that maybe, just maybe, the entire system was wrong. But they can't admit that. Can never admit that. Because then what were the last 300 years for? What did all those warriors die for? What was the point of the suffering and discipline and sacrifice? So they don't admit it. They just watch. Silent. Bitter. Irrelevant. You're seeing the last Spartiates gathering in their Syssitia. Eating black broth nobody can stomach anymore. Telling stories about Thermopylae. About when they mattered. When the world feared them. When being Spartan meant something. But those days are dust. And everyone knows it, even if nobody says it. Let yourself drift away from their sadness, from the weight of obsolescence. You're safe. You're comfortable. Just watching people trapped in a story they can't rewrite, in an identity that became a prison. The Mediterranean night settling over walls that protect nothing but pride. You're watching Sparta become a business, not a state, not a military power, a mercenary export company. By 350 BCE, this is what Sparta does. It rents out warriors. Individual Spartiates hiring themselves to foreign powers. Sometimes small groups. Officers commanding foreign troops. Trainers teaching other Greeks how to fight. It's the ultimate humiliation dressed up as pragmatism. You're meeting a Spartiate mercenary now. He's maybe 35, went through the Oligarchs, became a citizen, and now he's in Persia, fighting for a satrap in some regional dispute he doesn't understand or care about. The pay is good, better than anything Sparta can offer, which is nothing. Sparta offers nothing except tradition and poverty. So he fights for Persian gold. Here's the eccentric detail that shows how far they've fallen. Spartan mercenaries become fashionable, like a luxury brand. Rich tyrants and Persian nobles compete to hire them, not because they're necessarily better fighters than everyone else anymore, but because of the name, the reputation. Having Spartans in your army is a status symbol. Look, I can afford genuine Spartans. It's performative military power, and Sparta becomes complicit because the money helps. Mercenaries send gold home, support their families, keep the Sicilia contributions flowing, keep men in citizenship who'd otherwise drop out. The state starts depending on remittances from warriors selling themselves abroad. You're watching the home front now. Sparta in 340 BCE. The population is maybe 1,500 Spartiates, maybe less. Nobody keeps exact counts anymore. What's the point? The numbers only go down. The city feels empty. Whole neighborhoods abandoned. The Agoj trains maybe 30 boys a year. The Sicilia are ghost halls. Most men eat alone or in groups of 3 or 4. The mandatory 15-man mess is a fiction. They just don't have 15 men anymore. But they pretend. Keep the forms. Maintain the rituals. Because the rituals are all they have left. Historians still debate whether Sparta could have transitioned to a different model. Become a trading state like Corinth. A naval power like Athens. Something other than warriors. But they never try. Can't imagine being anything else. Warriors is their identity. Take that away, and what remains? Just another poor Greek town with delusions of grandeur. Now you're seeing the class resentment explode. The Hypomyones and Perioeci vastly outnumber full citizens. They're ethnically Spartan, trained in Spartan ways, but locked out of power, and they're getting angry. Around 330 BCE, there are conspiracy attempts, plots to overthrow the oligarchy, redistribute land, open citizenship, all crushed. The remaining Spartiates are terrified, not of foreign enemies, of their own people. The pyramid is inverting. Too few at the top, too many below. Simple physics says it has to collapse. You're watching one reform attempt. King Agis III tries to raise an army. Not of Spartiates, there aren't enough. He arms Perioeci and Hypomyones, gives them weapons and basic training. Tries to challenge Macedon. Yes, Macedon. Philip II has united Greece while Sparta was dying. Sparta didn't participate in that unification, didn't send troops to resist, didn't join Philip's league, just sat in Laconia, isolated, pretending they still mattered. So Agis raises his army and marches, and gets completely destroyed. The Battle of Megalopolis, 331 BCE. Agis dies fighting. 5,000 of his troops die, most of them Perioeci and Hypomyones. Not full Spartiates, because there aren't enough Spartiates to field an army anymore. Macedon barely notices. Alexander is in Persia, conquering the world. Philip's regent Antipater deals with Sparta as an afterthought. Sends troops, crushes the rebellion, doesn't even bother occupying Sparta, just makes them pay an indemnity, finds them like a minor nuisance. That's what Sparta is now, a minor nuisance, a historical curiosity, that former great power that's still somehow limping along. You're watching Spartiates return to mercenary work. What else can they do? The Macedonian world has no place for them, except as hired soldiers. So they hire themselves out. Fight in Alexander's wars. Fight in the wars of his successors. The Diadochi, Alexander's generals tearing his empire apart. They all want Spartan officers, Spartan trainers. The name still means something, even if the substance is gone. Here's what's psychologically devastating. Some Spartan mercenaries become rich. Individuals accumulating wealth serving four masters, while Sparta itself stays poor. The state that used to control everything watches its citizens prosper elsewhere, in service to non-Greeks. To the very Persians, Leonidas died fighting. The irony is suffocating, and nobody can fix it, because fixing it would require admitting it's broken, admitting the entire system was flawed from the beginning. And Spartans can't do that, won't do that, so they just continue. Slower, smaller, sadder, going through motions that lost their meaning decades ago. Let yourself drift away from this mercenary twilight, from warriors who became merchandise, from pride that became a commodity. You're safe. You're warm. Just watching the slow-motion dissolution of a civilization that couldn't bend, couldn't change, couldn't become anything except what it always was, until what it always was stopped being enough. You're watching Sparta become a tourist attraction. It sounds absurd, but it's true. By 200 BCE, Romans are visiting Sparta the way you might visit a Renaissance fair, to see people pretending to be something they once were. You're walking through Sparta with a wealthy Roman tourist now. He's maybe 40, made his fortune in trade, educated in Greek philosophy, and he's heard about Sparta his whole life. The legendary warriors, the austere lifestyle, the discipline and courage. He wants to see it, so he travels to Laconia and finds this, a town of maybe 1,000 people, mostly poor, playing at being Spartans for visitors. You're watching a performance now. Young men, not really Spartiates, not anymore, engaging in ritual combat, whipping ceremonies at the altar of Artemis Orthia, boys being flogged until they bleed, competing to see who can endure the most. It used to be part of the agoge, real training for real warriors. Now it's theater, entertainment for Romans who want to see the famous Spartan toughness. The boys still bleed. The pain is real, but the context is gone. They're not becoming warriors. There are no wars to fight, no helots to terrorize, no empire to defend. They're just performing Spartan-esque for coins and applause. Here's the eccentric detail historians find fascinating. Romans love this. They come in droves. Sparta becomes a popular destination on the educational tour wealthy Romans take through Greece. Athens for philosophy, Delphi for oracles, Sparta for cosplay violence. The Romans idealize Sparta, see in it the virtues they claim for themselves. Discipline, martial prowess, contempt for luxury. Never mind that Rome is wealthy beyond imagination. That Romans live in luxury Spartans would have considered obscene. They still admire the idea of Sparta, the myth, not the reality. You're listening to the local guides now. They tell the stories. Thermopylae, of course, Leonidas and the 300, the Battle of Plataea, the Peloponnesian War. All exaggerated, romanticized, simplified. History as entertainment. The guides don't mention Leuctra. Don't talk about the demographic collapse. Don't explain that modern Sparta is basically a historical theme park. Why would they? That doesn't sell. Historians still debate what happened to the actual Spartan system. When did the agoge truly end? When did the last real Spartiate die? The sources are vague. Maybe the system limped along in some form until 200 BCE. Maybe it collapsed earlier and what Romans saw was already pure performance. Either way, by the time Rome is interested, Sparta is already dead, just still moving, like a body that hasn't realized its heart stopped. You're in a syssitia now, or what's called a syssitia, a dozen men eating together. But they're not citizens. There's no citizenship anymore, not in the old sense. They're just locals maintaining tradition, eating terrible food because that's what Spartans do, wearing crimson cloaks because that's what Spartans wear, speaking tersely because that's how Spartans speak. It's cultural preservation, living history, except the people doing it aren't historians. They're desperate communities clinging to the only thing that makes them special, the only thing tourists will pay to see. Here's what's sad. Some of them probably believe it, probably think they're real Spartans, inheritors of Leonidas' legacy. The psychology of decline is strange that way. People can convince themselves they're maintaining something even as it dissolves around them. Now you're watching a philosophical debate. Roman visitors asking Spartan elders about their way of life. The elders give stock answers. Discipline, courage, contempt for wealth. The same lines that have been repeated for centuries. The The Romans nod appreciatively. Write it down in their journals. Go home and tell stories about the authentic Spartans they met, never realizing they met actors, or that maybe there's no difference anymore. When everyone who remembers the real thing is dead, the performance becomes the reality. You're seeing Rome gradually absorb Greece, not through violent conquest, through roads and trade and cultural integration. Greek cities become Roman allies, then Roman dependencies, then Roman provinces. It happens so smoothly most Greeks barely notice. Sparta resists longer than most, not militarily. They have no military, but culturally, insisting on their independence, their special status, even as they become economically dependent on Roman tourism, even as they adopt Roman customs, even as Latin starts mixing with Greek in the streets. The contradiction is painful. We're Spartans, they insist. We're different. We're special, while selling performances of Spartanness to foreigners. While living off the wealth of the empire, they claim to disdain. Let yourself drift through this strange twilight, the museum of a civilization. The performers who might have forgotten they're performing. You're safe. You're comfortable. Just watching identity become commerce. Watching history become entertainment. The Mediterranean moon rising over a city that's become its own monument. You're about to see how mathematics destroys civilizations. Not war, not plague, just numbers and greed. It's 250 BC, maybe earlier. Sparta has around 1,500 citizens, maybe less. But here's the thing that dooms them completely. Land ownership has concentrated into about 100 families, maybe fewer. 100 families controlling everything. 1,500 citizens theoretically existing, but only 100 with actual wealth and power. You're watching the mechanism. It's elegant in its cruelty. A Spartiate dies. His land goes to his children. But Spartan law allows women to inherit. Daughters get shares. Those daughters marry. Often marry cousins or men from other wealthy families. Land consolidates, generation by generation. Wealth pools. Now, add the citizenship requirement. To be a Spartiate, you must contribute to your Syssitia. That requires land income. If you can't pay, you're out. You become a Hypomean, still Spartan by blood, still trained in the agoge as a child, but not a citizen, not in the elite. No vote, no power, no status. Here's the mathematical trap. As land concentrates, fewer men can maintain citizenship. They drop out. The citizen body shrinks. The remaining oligarchs control more, have less incentive to share. The pyramid inverts further. By 244 BCE, Sparta has maybe 700 full citizens. 700, down from 8,000 at their peak. A 90% collapse. And of those 700, only 100 or so actually matter. The rest are barely scraping by. One bad harvest from losing citizenship. One failed business deal from dropping out. The anxiety must be suffocating. You're watching one of these marginal Spartiates now. He's maybe 50. His father was wealthy, but the inheritance split between siblings. His portion is small. He works constantly to maintain it, scrimping on everything, eating the minimum, wearing old cloaks, all to maintain the Syssitia contribution, all to stay in the club, because dropping out is death. Social death, anyway. Your children lose status. Your family loses honor. You become invisible. Historians still argue whether this was intentional. Did the oligarchs deliberately keep the requirements strict to maintain their monopoly? Or was it just the unintended consequence of inheritance patterns? Probably both. Some oligarchs definitely benefited from keeping citizenship exclusive. More power for them. But the system's logic also drove it. Once you start down this path, it's hard to reverse. Here's the eccentric detail that shows how broken things are. Some Spartan women are fabulously wealthy, wealthier than anyone else in Greece, owning vast estates, controlling enormous wealth. But they can't vote, can't hold office, can't officially participate in politics. The men who can participate are often their sons, brothers, or husbands, dependent on women's wealth, but wielding the formal power. It creates a strange dynamic. Women with economic power, but no political voice. Men with political power, but no economic independence. a system that satisfies nobody. You're watching the debt crisis develop. Many marginal Spartiates are borrowing money from the rich oligarchs, taking loans to maintain their contributions, hoping to pay it back someday. But agricultural economics are unstable. One drought, one crop failure, and you can't repay. The debt grows. The oligarchs foreclose. Take the land. The borrower loses citizenship. More concentration, more inequality, more instability. Now you're about to meet someone interesting. King Agis IV. He becomes king in 244 BCE. He's young, maybe 20, idealistic, and he looks around Sparta and sees the disaster clearly. 700 citizens in a city that once had 8,000. Massive inequality, social tension, the whole system on the verge of collapse. So he proposes radical reform. Cancel all debts, redistribute land, create 4,500 new citizen plots, bring imperioesi and worthy outsiders, rebuild the citizen body, save Sparta by transforming it. You're watching the oligarchs respond. They're terrified. This would destroy their wealth, their power, their entire position. They oppose it absolutely. But here's where it gets interesting. Many poor Spartiates support Agis. The marginal citizens drowning in debt. The hypomyones who might regain citizenship. Even some perioesi who see opportunity. There's a coalition for change. Maybe Sparta can reform. Maybe it's not too late. You're watching Agis push his reforms through. He's charismatic. He has royal authority. He convinces the assembly. They vote for debt cancellation. They vote for redistribution. It's happening. Sparta might actually save itself. And then the oligarchs move. They control the ephorate, the 5 officials who check royal power. They accuse Agis of tyranny, of trying to overthrow the constitution. They arrest him, and they kill him, the king of Sparta, executed by his own state, for trying to save it. The reforms die with him. The debts stay. The land stays concentrated. The oligarchs win, and Sparta continues dying. Just slower now, more painfully. Let yourself feel the tragedy of this. The moment when salvation was possible, when reform could have worked, and greed, just simple human greed, killed it. You're warm. You're safe. Just watching mathematics and selfishness strangle a civilization. Watching people choose their own wealth over their society's survival. The night settling over Sparta's final mischance. You're watching history try one more time. One last attempt to save Sparta from itself. It's 227 BC, 17 years after they killed Agis. 17 years of continued decline. The citizen body is now maybe 500, maybe less. The inequality is worse. The social tension is unbearable. And a new king rises. Cleomenes III. He's different from Agis. Not just idealistic, strategic, ruthless when necessary. You're watching him plan carefully. He knows what happened to Agis. Knows the oligarchs will resist. So he doesn't ask permission. He builds support first. In the army. Among the dispossessed. With the hypomyones and perioesi who have nothing to lose. He waits for the right moment. Then he strikes. In a single night, he has the ephors killed. All 5 of them. The oligarchs who blocked reform. The guardians of inequality. Gone. It's a coup. A royal coup against his own aristocracy. Unprecedented in Spartan history. And he doesn't stop there. He exiles 80 of the richest citizens. The oligarchs who controlled everything. Sent them away. Confiscates their land. And then he implements the reforms Agis died for. Cancels debts. Redistributes land. Creates 4,000 new citizen plots. Grants citizenship to perioesi and worthy outsiders. Restores the Syssitia properly. Rebuilds the agoge with adequate funding. You're watching Sparta transform overnight. Suddenly there are citizens again. Thousands of them. Men who thought they'd never have status. Families who've been locked out for generations. Suddenly included. Suddenly Spartan. The energy is electric. Hope after decades of despair. Maybe Sparta can be great again. Maybe the reforms will work. Here's the eccentric detail that shows Cleomenes' genius. He doesn't just redistribute wealth. He redistributes it to create warriors. 4,000 new Spartiates means 4,000 new hoplites. A real army again. Not mercenaries, not hired guns, actual citizens fighting for their own state. And it works. Cleomenes leads this new army into battle against other Greek states and wins. Sparta starts winning again, defeating enemies, taking territory, looking dangerous. For the first time in a century, people fear Sparta again. Historians still argue whether Cleomenes was a reformer or a tyrant. He killed people, exiled others, seized power by force. That's tyranny by definition. But he used that power to distribute wealth downward, to include the excluded, to rebuild the citizen body. That's reform. Maybe he's both. Maybe saving a civilization sometimes requires violence against those who'd rather let it die. You're watching the problem emerge. Sparta isn't isolated. This is the Hellenistic world now. Big kingdoms with professional armies. The Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Syria, and, crucially, the Antigonids in Macedon. Macedon sees Sparta's revival, sees Cleomenes winning battles, expanding influence, and Macedon doesn't like it. Neither do Sparta's old enemies in Greece. The Achaean League, a confederation of Greek cities, fears Spartan resurgence. They remember when Sparta dominated. Don't want that again. So they do something desperate. They invite Macedon to intervene, call in foreign power to stop Sparta. Greeks asking Macedonians to suppress Greeks. The irony is bitter. You're at the Battle of Silesia now. 222 BCE, Cleomenes with his reformed Spartan army. Maybe 6,000 hoplites. Half of them, the new citizens, fighting for their city, their new status, their chance at a future. Facing them, 28,000 troops. The Achaean League, the Macedonian army, overwhelming numbers, professional soldiers, better equipment. The math is impossible, but Spartans fight anyway. Because what else can they do? They fight desperately, bravely. The battle lasts all day. The new Spartiates prove themselves, fight as well as any warriors in Greece. But numbers matter. Superior tactics matter. Macedonian phalanx breaks them. 2,000 Spartans die, including most of the new citizens. The men Cleomenes just granted status, dead in their first major battle. The demographic recovery erased in an afternoon. Cleomenes survives, flees to Egypt, tries to raise support, ends up dead there, either suicide or assassination. Sources disagree. Either way, he's gone, and his reforms die with him. You're watching Macedon occupy Sparta, install a puppet government. The oligarchs who survived, who Cleomenes exiled, come back, reclaim their wealth, reverse the reforms, cancel the new citizenships. Everything returns to how it was, except worse, because now there are even fewer citizens. The 2,000 who died at Silesia. The demographic window closed. The last chance gone. Here's what's tragic. The reforms worked. For 5 years, they worked. Sparta had an army again, citizens again, hope again. It didn't fail because reform was impossible. It failed because the external world wouldn't allow it. Because other Greeks preferred Sparta dead rather than revived. Because saving yourself means nothing if everyone else wants you to disappear. Let yourself rest in this nearly was. This glimpse of what might have been. You're safe. You're warm. Just watching the last door close. The final possibility expire. The Mediterranean stars looking down on a revolution that almost saved everything. And saved nothing. You're watching Rome arrive. Not with armies. Not with violence. With roads and law and the slow suffocation of irrelevance. It's 195 BC. Rome has just defeated Macedon. The Second Macedonian War. Rome declares itself the liberator of Greece. Frees Greek cities from Macedonian control, including Sparta. Sparta is free now, autonomous, independent, and completely powerless. You're watching the Roman general Flamininus at the Isthmian Games. He makes a grand announcement. All Greek cities are free. No garrisons. No tribute. Self-governing. The crowd goes wild. Greeks celebrating their liberation, not realizing they're just changing masters. Rome doesn't need to occupy Greece. Doesn't need garrisons. Their system is more subtle. They integrate economies. Build roads connecting Greek cities to Roman trade networks. Establish legal frameworks that benefit Roman interests. create dependencies that look like partnerships. You're in Sparta watching this happen. The city is tiny now, maybe 300 citizens, maybe less. Nobody counts anymore. What's the point? Rome doesn't care about Spartan citizenship anyway. Roman law operates differently. Individuals have rights, not just citizens of particular cities. It's a foreign concept to Spartans, but they're learning. Here's the eccentric detail that shows the transformation. Some Spartans start appealing to Roman courts when local disputes can't be resolved. When the Spartan system, what's left of it, fails them, they go to Roman magistrates, ask for Roman intervention. It's practical. Rome has power. Sparta doesn't. So why not use Roman law? But each appeal erodes Spartan autonomy a little more. Each Roman judgment sets precedent. Each intervention makes Sparta a little less independent, a little more Roman. You're watching the economy shift. Sparta used to be subsistence agriculture. Helots farming. Spartiates contributing to Sicilia. Simple and closed. Now trade flows through. Roman merchants. Easter goods. Money replacing barter. The old economic system doesn't function. Can't function. The Sicilia still exist nominally. But they're different. Men eating together because it's tradition. Not because the state requires it. Not because it's tied to citizenship. Just because that's what Spartans do. Or did. Or remember doing. Historians still argue when Sparta officially becomes part of the Roman Empire. There's no clear date. No conquest. No declaration. Around 146 BCE, Rome absorbs Achaia as a province. Sparta is included in that somehow, but also maintains some autonomy. It's ambiguous. Deliberately so. Rome is good at ambiguous dominance. You're watching a Roman tourist again. Different one from before. It's 100 BCE now. He's visiting Sparta on the cultural tour, seeing the sights, the ancient training grounds, the tomb of Leonidas, probably not actually his tomb, but who cares? The performance of the whipping ceremony. He buys souvenirs, little bronze Spartan warriors, crimson cloth supposedly made the traditional way. Tourist kitsch. Sparta's main industry now is nostalgia, selling its past to Romans who romanticize what it never quite was. Here's what's psychologically devastating. Some Spartans lean into this, play up their Spartanness for Roman consumption, exaggerate the austerity, perform the toughness. It's degrading, but it's income, and Sparta has no other income. No empire, no helots, no trade goods, just history. So they sell history. You're watching the language shift. Greek is still spoken, obviously, but Latin creeps in. Roman terms for legal concepts. Roman names for offices. Code switching between languages. The educated elite speak both. The poor speak mangled mixtures. Within a few generations, some Spartans will have Roman names. Roman dress. Roman habits. Still calling themselves Spartans. Still pointing to Leonidas' supposed tomb. But increasingly Roman in everything except nostalgia. Now you're seeing something strange. Sparta under Rome is more stable than it's been in centuries. No wars. No demographic collapse. No citizen crises. Because none of that matters anymore. Roman peace, the Pax Romana, eliminates the need for warriors. Trade brings modest prosperity. Tourism provides income. It's comfortable, safe, boring. Everything Sparta used to despise. And maybe that's the real extinction. Not when the last Spartiate dies, but when being Spartan stops meaning anything. When it's just a brand, a tourist attraction, a historical curiosity for Roman schoolboys to write essays about. You're watching an old man in 50 BCE. His grandfather claimed to be a real Spartiate, born when the reforms still meant something, when citizenship still existed. This old man was raised on those stories. Leonidas and Thermopylae, the Agoge and the Sicilia, discipline and courage. But he's never fought in a war, never trained as a warrior, never experienced what being Spartan meant. He just performs it for tourists. Wears the cloak, speaks tersely, eats plain food in public, then goes home to his Roman-style house, with Roman furniture, eating Roman food in private, living the contradiction, being Spartan as a costume, a role he plays, not an identity he inhabits. Here's the question historians can't answer definitively. When did the last real Spartan die? Was it Cleomenes III in Egypt? Was it some anonymous warrior at Sellasia? Was it centuries later, some old man who remembered when it meant something? Or did Sparta die gradually, not a moment, but a process? Identity fading like color from cloth left in the sun? Let yourself drift through this quiet ending. No battles, no final stand, just absorption, integration, irrelevance. You're safe. You're comfortable. Watching a civilization not destroyed but dissolved, not conquered but commodified. The Mediterranean night soft and warm, over a city that became a memory of itself. You're searching for the last Spartan, the final one, the person who was genuinely, authentically, meaningfully Spartan, and you can't find them. The historical record goes silent, blurs, fades into Roman administrative documents and tourist accounts. It's 100 CE now, maybe 150 CE, the Roman Empire at its height. Sparta still exists as a place, a town in the province of Achaia. People live there, maybe 3,000 or 4,000. They call themselves Spartans. Technically accurate. They're from Sparta. But are they Spartan? You're walking through the town. It looks like any other Roman provincial city. Forum in the center. Roman-style buildings. Public baths. Spartans have public baths now. The irony thick. Temples to Roman gods alongside Greek ones. Latin inscriptions on monuments. The crimson cloaks are still visible. Some people wear them, mostly for festivals or when Romans visit. But they're made differently now. Not the austere wool of ancient times. Finer fabric, dyed with Roman techniques. More costume than uniform. Here's the eccentric detail that breaks your heart. The agoge still exists. Sort of. There's a training ground. Boys go through some kind of program. But it's not education for warfare. It's cultural preservation, like a historical society. Teaching boys how their ancestors supposedly lived. Learning to endure some mild discomfort. Performing rituals nobody understands anymore. Then they grow up and become Roman citizens. Take Roman jobs. Live Roman lives. The agoge is a summer camp now. Character building. Heritage education. Not warrior creation. You're watching one of these boys. He's maybe 14. Going through the motions. Learning to fight with wooden swords. Being taught to speak tersely in Old Doric dialect. Memorizing stories about Thermopylae. He's bored. Counting the days until it's over. Until he could go to Athens for philosophy studies. Or Rome for law. Or Alexandria for medicine. The world is huge now, connected by Roman roads and shipping lanes. A Spartan boy can become anything. Merchant, scholar, administrator, officer in Roman legions. Why would he choose to be just Spartan? What does that even mean anymore? Historians still debate whether this is death or transformation. Some argue Sparta died when the warrior class disappeared. Others say it transformed, became something new but still distinctively Spartan. The romantic view versus the practical view. Both probably true in different ways. You're in a wealthy Spartan's house now. He's descended from old Spartiate families. Can trace his lineage back centuries. His home is beautiful. Mosaics on the floor. Painted walls. Roman furniture. Greek art. A library with scrolls. Philosophy, poetry, history. He's educated. Speaks perfect Greek and Latin. Corresponds with scholars across the empire. He'll tell you he's Spartan, proud of his heritage. He donates money to maintain the old training grounds, sponsors the ritual festivals, wears crimson on appropriate occasions. But he lives like a Roman aristocrat, enjoys luxury, values learning over warfare, participates in empire-wide culture. Is he Spartan? You think so, but Leonidas wouldn't recognize him, wouldn't understand him, might despise him. Now you're seeing something that might be the true end. Around 250 CE, the Helot, Gothic tribes, invade Greece. They sack Athens. They attack Sparta. And Sparta falls immediately. No heroic defense. No last stand. The walls, those walls they built centuries ago, prove inadequate. The Spartans flee or surrender. Some fight, probably, but not effectively, not memorably. The Helot loot and leave. Sparta rebuilds. But it's just a town now, not even pretending to be special anymore. Here's what's devastating. Nobody really notices. A few historians mention it in passing. The helot sacked Sparta. One line. No drama. No significance. Because Sparta doesn't matter anymore. Hasn't mattered for centuries. Its fall is a footnote, not a tragedy. You're in the 300 CE now. Christianity is spreading. The old gods are fading. The old ways disappearing. Temples are being converted to churches. The altar of Artemis Orthia, where boys were whipped, becomes a Christian site. The rituals stop. The performances end. The tourists stop coming. Because Christians don't romanticize pagan warrior culture. They have different values. Different heroes. Martyrs, not warriors. Saints, not soldiers. Sparta's last economic engine dies. The town shrinks. Becomes poorer. More irrelevant. By 400 CE, maybe 1,000 people live there. By 500 CE, maybe fewer. The Byzantine Empire barely acknowledges it exists. Here's the question nobody can answer. Who was the last person to die who genuinely believed they were Spartan? Not culturally, not ancestrally, but essentially, who was the last person who felt in their bones what it meant to be Spartan? Maybe someone in 200 CE, maybe 100 CE, maybe centuries earlier. The identity didn't end. It faded, diluted, transformed into something else. Like water flowing into the sea. Still water, but not river anymore. Not distinct, not itself. You're standing in the ruins now. Centuries later, archaeologists will dig here, find the training grounds, the Syssitia halls, the temples. They'll reconstruct, theorize, write books, and tourists will come again. Different tourists, modern ones, taking photos, buying souvenirs. The cycle continues. Sparta as commodity, as symbol, as myth. But the people, the actual Spartans, they're gone, dissolved into history, absorbed by empire, transformed by time, until searching for the last one becomes impossible. Because there was no last one, just a gradual fading, like the last star of morning. You can't say when it disappeared. You just look up, and it's gone. Let yourself rest in this absence, this quiet dissolution. You're warm. You're safe. Just watching identity become memory. Watching certainty become questions nobody can answer. The Mediterranean darkness complete now. Nothing left but ruins and stories. You're stepping back now, looking at the whole picture. The entire arc from rise to extinction. And you're seeing the equation. The mathematical certainty Sparta couldn't escape. It's simple, really. Almost elegant in its cruelty. Military excellence plus demographic rigidity equals civilizational suicide. Let's break it down. You're watching the variables. First, extreme specialization. Sparta chose to be the best warriors. Not good warriors who also farmed. Not soldiers who also traded. The absolute best. Period. That required total commitment. 30 years of training. Constant practice. Complete dedication. No distractions. No other identities. It worked. They became the best. But specialization creates vulnerability. Because the world doesn't need just one thing. Civilizations need farmers and merchants. Builders and diplomats. Artists and administrators. Sparta had perioeci and helots for that. But that leads to variable 2. Second, massive inequality. 3% ruling 97%. That's not a society. That's an occupation. You can maintain it with terror. Sparta did for centuries. But it requires constant military superiority, constant vigilance. The moment you weaken, the foundation cracks. And that foundation was people. Enslaved people who outnumbered you 10-1, who remembered being free, who wanted freedom back. Historians still debate whether the helot system was sustainable. Some argue it worked for 300 years, clearly sustainable. Others say it was always doomed. The cost kept mounting. Probably the second group is right. The system worked until it didn't. And when it failed catastrophically. Third variable, rigid citizenship. Sparta's strength came from purity. Clear standards. No compromise. You're Spartiate or you're not. Born into it. Trained from childhood. Tested constantly. This created excellence. But also inflexibility. Athens could grant citizenship to valuable foreigners. Rome would eventually grant it to whole provinces. Adaptability kept them growing. Sparta couldn't adapt. Wouldn't. Their purity was their identity. Change that, and what's the point of being Sparta? Here's the eccentric detail that makes the math inevitable. Replacement rate. Any population needs about 2.1 children per woman to maintain itself. Account for infant mortality, childhood disease, training attrition, war deaths. Sparta probably needed 3 or 4 surviving children per Spartiate woman, just to stay level. They weren't hitting that, especially after Thermopylae, Leuctra, the helot revolts. Every generation smaller than the last. And the citizenship requirements meant you couldn't bring in replacements. Fourth variable, concentration of wealth. As population declined, land concentrated. Fewer families controlling more. Those families had less incentive to share. Why dilute your power? Why bring in new citizens who'd vote against your interests? Better to maintain oligarchy, even if it kills Sparta, because it kills the Sparta you don't control. Your personal wealth survives, at least for a while. It's rational selfishness, catastrophic collectively, beneficial individually. The tragedy of the commons written in human lives. You're seeing the cascade now, the way each variable amplified the others. Military focus required helot labor. Helot labor required military control. Military control required citizens. Citizens required land income. Land concentrated among oligarchs. Oligarchs blocked reform. Reform failure meant population decline. Population decline meant military weakness. Military weakness meant helot freedom. Helot freedom meant economic collapse. Economic collapse meant fewer citizens. Fewer citizens meant military weakness. The snake eating its tail. Historians still argue whether Sparta could have broken the cycle. The optimists say yes, if they'd reformed early. If they'd opened citizenship after Thermopylae. If they'd compromised on purity. If they'd adapted the economic system. The pessimists say no. The system's logic was totalizing. Change one part, and the whole thing collapses. Sparta was what it was. Could only be what it was. And what it was couldn't survive. Here's the comparison that matters. Rome lasted 1,000 years in the West. 1,500 in the East. Rome was flexible, adaptive, incorporated outsiders constantly, changed constantly, barely resembled its original form by the end. But it endured. Sparta lasted maybe 300 years as a real power. Then 400 years as a declining irrelevance. Then dissolved into nothing. Because it couldn't change, couldn't become something else, couldn't survive its own excellence. You're seeing modern parallels now. Societies that optimize for one thing, that create rigid hierarchies, that refuse to adapt, that let wealth concentrate, that can't integrate outsiders, that confuse purity with strength. The patterns repeat. Different contexts. Same mathematics. The equation still works. Specialization plus rigidity equals extinction. Maybe slower in modern times. Maybe with different details. But the underlying logic remains. Systems that can adapt die. Populations that don't reproduce disappear. Oligarchies that won't share power collapse. Sparta isn't just ancient history. It's a warning written in human suffering and demographic mathematics. A civilization that achieved something incredible and destroyed itself achieving it. Let yourself drift through these patterns, these eternal equations. You're safe. You're comfortable. Just watching mathematics play out in human lives. Seeing inevitability disguised as choice. Understanding that excellence isn't enough. That being the best at one thing means nothing if you can't do the other necessary things. The Mediterranean wind blowing through empty training grounds, where boys once learned to be warriors and never learned to be anything else. You're connecting the ancient past to right now, to the world outside your window. Because Sparta's extinction isn't just history. It's a pattern that keeps repeating. And maybe we should pay attention. You're looking at modern societies facing similar pressures. Demographic decline, economic inequality, rigid systems that can't adapt. The details differ. The mathematics remain the same. Take Japan. Extraordinary culture, technological excellence, but birth rates below replacement, population aging, Immigration restricted by cultural concerns about purity. The mathematics are clear. Fewer workers, smaller tax base, growing elderly population needing care. It's not the same as Sparta. Japan isn't enslaving neighbors, isn't training child warriors. But the demographic equation is similar. Excellence in certain areas, rigidity in others, and time running out. Or look at certain European countries. Birth rates declining, native populations shrinking, immigration creating cultural tension. Some people want to maintain cultural purity, keep things as they were. Others say adapt or die, integrate newcomers, change and survive. It's the same debate Sparta had, same choice between purity and survival. Here's the eccentric detail that connects past and future. Sparta's population collapse took about 200 years. Modern demographic changes happen faster. Better medicine, modern economics, rapid communication. We can see the crisis coming. Have decades, maybe, to respond. Sparta had decades too. They saw it coming. They chose purity over survival. Will we? You're seeing inequality patterns repeat. Wealth concentrating in fewer hands. Middle classes struggling. The poor locked out entirely. Different mechanisms than ancient land inheritance. But similar results. In many countries, the top 1% controls enormous wealth. The bottom 50% almost none. Political power follows wealth. Always has. Oligarchy by another name. Sparta's oligarchs blocked reform because it threatened their wealth. Modern wealth holders resist redistribution for the same reason. Rational individually, catastrophic collectively. The same trap. Historians still argue whether modern democracies can avoid Sparta's fate. The optimists say democracy allows peaceful reform. We can vote for redistribution, for immigration, for adaptation, before it's too late. The pessimists say wealth buys political influence, regulatory capture, media control. The system becomes self-protecting, like Sparta's efforts protecting oligarchy. Democracy in name, oligarchy in function. Now you're seeing the military parallel. Countries that overinvest in military, neglect infrastructure, education, healthcare. The military-industrial complex becomes self-justifying. We need defense spending to remain strong. But strength for what? Sparta was the strongest military in Greece. And it didn't matter. Being the best warrior doesn't help if your population collapses, if your economy fails, if your society fractures. You win every battle and lose the civilization. Here's the comparison that matters. Adaptable systems survive. Rome wasn't the best at anything. Not the best warriors. That was Sparta. Not the best sailors. That was Carthage. Not the best culture. That was Athens. But Rome was good enough at everything, and flexible enough to incorporate better ideas. They copied Greek culture, adopted foreign gods, granted citizenship to conquered peoples, changed constantly, and endured. Modern societies that adapt survive. Accept immigrants who bring new energy. Reform economic systems before inequality explodes. Invest in people, not just military. Balance excellence with pragmatism. You're thinking about your own society now. Whatever country you're in, are the birth rates sustainable? Is inequality growing? Are systems adapting or calcifying? Can your society integrate newcomers? Or does it demand purity? Does it invest in people? Or just protect existing wealth? Is it flexible or rigid? These aren't just academic questions. They're survival questions. The same one Sparta faced. Here's what's hopeful. We know the story now. Know how it ends. Know what doesn't work. Sparta didn't have that knowledge. They were inventing their system. Couldn't see the long-term consequences. We can. We have their failure as a warning. And not just Sparta's. Dozens of civilizations that couldn't adapt. That chose purity over pragmatism. That let inequality explode. That specialized themselves into extinction. The pattern is clear. The question is whether we'll learn from it. Historians still debate whether historical lessons transfer. Different contexts, different details. Maybe each generation has to learn these lessons themselves, through their own suffering. Or maybe, just maybe, we can learn from others' mistakes. Can see the mathematical trap before it closes. Can choose adaptation over purity. Survival over pride. You're seeing the choice clearly now. Every society faces it eventually. Change and lose your identity, or maintain your identity and disappear. Sparta chose disappearance, consciously, deliberately, preferring extinction to transformation. We can choose differently, can decide identity is less important than survival, that cultures can evolve and still be meaningful, that inclusion beats purity, that flexibility beats rigidity. Every time, in every context, for every civilization. The mathematics don't lie. Let yourself rest with this knowledge. This warning from the past. You're warm. You're safe. Living in a world that could learn from Sparta. That could choose differently. That could adapt instead of calcify. That could include instead of exclude. The choice is always available. Until suddenly it isn't. Until the demographic mathematics become irreversible. Until the inequality explodes into chaos. Until the rigid system snaps. Sparta teaches us the deadline is real. The window closes. The chance passes. And then it's too late. Just slow dissolution. Gradual irrelevance. The long fade into historical footnotes. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can choose otherwise. It can be Rome instead of Sparta. Adaptable instead of pure. Inclusive instead of exclusive. Surviving instead of perfecting. The ancient lesson. Still relevant, still urgent, still waiting to see if we'll learn it. Before the mathematics close in, before the choices disappear, before the fade begins. You're letting it all go now. The warriors and the walls, the crimson cloaks and bronze helmets, the pride and the mathematics, all of it fading, dissolving into the Mediterranean night. You're safe in your bed, the world outside quiet, or maybe alive with its own sounds. Traffic humming, rain falling, wind through trees, the sounds of a world that keeps turning, that outlasts civilizations, that doesn't care about empires or their endings. Sparta is dust now, literal dust, the training grounds covered by olive groves, the Syssitia halls reduced to foundation stones, the barracks gone, the walls crumbled. Even the stones have mostly been carried away, used to build other things, churches and farmhouses, modern roads and parking lots. The physical Sparta recycled into the present. Nothing wasted. Nothing really lost. Just transformed. But the people, the actual Spartans, they're truly gone. Their genes survive, probably, scattered through Greek populations. Mediterranean DNA carrying fragments of warriors. But the identity, the culture, the specific thing that made them Spartan, that's extinct. As extinct as dinosaurs or dodo birds. You can visit the site, walk where they walked, stand in the valley where boys trained. Look at the mountains they saw. The sky is the same. The sun still beats down. The earth still smells of dust and herbs. But they're not there. Can't be there. Won't ever be there again. And maybe that's okay. Maybe extinction is just part of the cycle. Civilizations rise. They peak. They decline. They disappear, making room for new ones. New ideas. New ways of being human. Sparta had its moment. Burned bright and brief. Like a meteor across the sky. Spectacular. Memorable. Gone. And we're left with the lessons. The warnings. The mathematics. The understanding that excellence isn't enough. That purity is a trap. That rigidity is death. That adaptation is survival. These lessons outlast the civilization that taught them. Sparta failed so we could learn. Died so we could understand. Their extinction is their final gift. The last thing they can teach us. Here's what you should take into sleep. Not the battles. Not the glory. Not the crimson and bronze. But the quiet truth underneath. That being human means changing, adapting, including, surviving not through perfection, but through flexibility. Through accepting the new. Through letting go of what we were to become what we need to be. Sparta couldn't do that. Wouldn't. And so they're gone. But you're still here. Still breathing. Still warm under your blankets. Part of civilizations that are still choosing. Still deciding whether to adapt or calcify. Whether to include or exclude. Whether to survive or perfect themselves into extinction. You can't control civilizations. Can't single-handedly save societies. But you can carry the lesson. Can understand the pattern. can make small choices that lean toward adaptation, toward inclusion, toward flexibility, toward survival. And maybe that's enough. Maybe civilizations are just millions of small choices, accumulated, aggregated, until they become destiny. Let yourself drift now. Really drift. The story is over. The Spartans are gone. The lessons remain. But you don't need to hold on to them tightly. Don't need to grip them. Just let them settle. Like dust settling after a wind. Like stars settling into their places. Like you're breathing, settling into sleep. You're warm. You're comfortable. Your pillow is soft beneath your head. Your blankets are heavy and safe. The world is far away. The ancient world farther still. The warriors sleeping their final sleep. The crimson cloaks faded to nothing. The bronze returned to earth. The stones scattered. The stories told. And you're drifting now into your own dreams. Your own quiet darkness. Where there are no wars. No demographic collapses. No civilizational mathematics. Just peace. Just rest. Just the soft Mediterranean night. Settling over everything. Over the past and the present. Over the living and the dead. Over the warriors who forgot to become anything else. And over you. Safe in your bed. Warm in your blankets. Breathing slowly. Deeply. Easily. Letting it all go. The rise and the fall. The glory and the extinction. The lessons and the warnings. All of it fading. Into sleep. Into dreams. Into the gentle darkness. Where ancient Sparta finally rests. Where the last warrior finally lays down his shield. Where the crimson cloaks dissolve into twilight. Where everything that was becomes memory, becomes story, becomes dust, becomes dream, becomes sleep, becomes nothing but the soft whisper of the Mediterranean wind. Through olive groves, over ancient stones, carrying the scent of dust and time. And finally, silence, peace, rest, sleep, sweet dreams.